How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Well, hello, and welcome to the Cinema Shock.
The Cinema Shock. We've been off for 3 weeks, and Gary already forgot how to do a podcast.
Yeah, and I'd stopped having to worry about how to do the intro too, because you had been putting it in the notes.
Yeah, I didn't put it in the notes this time.
You didn't put it in the notes. But
Nice.
We are the podcast where we explore the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I am your co-host, Gary Horne.
I am co-host Justin Bishop.
And I am one of your other co-hosts.
I also forgot how to.
Yeah, I forgot how to podcast first. Sorry, guys. I am one of your other hosts, writer, comedian, Mr. Todd Davis. Greetings and welcome to a bonus episode as we work our way through the works of the Wachowskis in our series called The Cinema of Fluidity.
Yeah, so that we've been kind of teasing this episode for most of this series, saying, "Oh yeah, we'll get to Sense8. We'll probably talk about it during." Jupiter Ascending or during when we talk about the Matrix Resurrections. And it turns out you can't squeeze a conversation about a 25-hour epic into just a little footnote on another episode, because we all watched it or rewatched it as we were doing the series over time. And we all kind of figured this kind of deserves a full discussion, I think.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So this is it. And by the way, Happy New Year, gentlemen.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Everyone else out there. I hope everyone had a good Christmas. I hope you don't have Omicron.
Not yet.
But there's a good chance that you do.
Can we start calling listeners the Cinema Shockers?
Yeah, I think that's the official name of our listeners are the Shockers.
Nice.
I also have a neighbor using a chainsaw. And so I don't know if you guys can hear that. If you can't,
I can't. Is it Fred Durst?
It's not.
Could it also be?
Otherwise, my ass would be raw.
So I mean, we can't hear it. So if they do it, if we do, it'll just add to the ambiance of this very professional recording that we're doing today. So as we've discussed pretty extensively on this series so far, the Wachowskis are filled, I think it goes without saying, with some very big ideas, and sometimes, as in the case of the Matrix, those ideas work and connect with a larger audience, and then other times on, let's say, Jupiter Ascending, that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes their ideas are just too big. Sometimes they have so much story to tell that it all can't be contained in a single 2-hour runtime. And that was the case with The Matrix. Remember, it was planned as a full trilogy all along, although the sequels weren't greenlit until the original film's success. It's also the case, I think, and we discussed this on the episode, but I think it's the case with Jupiter Ascending too, a film that has almost too much story and backstory crammed into its 2-hour runtime.
Yeah, I know. I felt that way for sure.
Yeah, so it makes sense that following Jupiter Ascending, the Wachowskis would look to a new format to tell their stories. Now, this is not the first time that they've dabbled in another medium. We've talked about this all kind of, especially at the beginning of the series. Remember, the Matrix series includes an animated anthology film and a video game that are all considered canon. And then also back in 2004, hot off the success of the Matrix sequels, they dipped their toes back into the comic book world. Remember, they'd started out in comics early on, but they actually created a comic book company of their own called Burly Man Entertainment. In addition to creating some tie-in stories for the Matrix, they also created a couple of original comics. They were Doc Frankenstein, which is drawn by Steve Skroce, remember their longtime concept artist, and co-created by Jeff Darrow, with the Wachowskis on scripting duties. They wrote that particular one. And then Shaolin Cowboy, which we mentioned on the show before, that one was written and drawn by Jeff Darrow himself.
Mm-hmm.
But also so they've toyed around with long form storytelling somewhat. I mean, those comics didn't last very long, so they didn't get very long form into their stories, but they've tried to try to tell stories on a bigger scale. And then the years after these ventures, something big really happened. Streaming became kind of the king of media. First, of course, with the rise of Netflix, then with its competitors. And then with this war, the streaming war, the biggest weapon that any of these services could wield was original content. I mean, it's ubiquitous now. There's Netflix originals all over the place. This wasn't always the case. This happened, in the last 5 years, probably.
Yeah, it's about right.
So a lot of these streaming services, they start throwing tons of money at filmmakers and storytellers in an attempt to create kind of the next big thing. And that's where the Wachowskis come in. In 2015, they debuted a long-form project that would prove to be their most ambitious storytelling attempt to date. And that is the subject, of course, of today's bonus episode. We're talking about Sense8.
If you know what it means to be reborn, a sensate.
A what?
You saw her, but that's just the beginning.
I can feel you. You're not really here, are you?
You are no longer just you. You will start to feel strange things. Anger and joy and pain. Pleasure, without any reason. You have 7 other selves now. You can access each other's knowledge, language, skills. You will be hunted. There's no more time. You need to run.
I'm losing my mind.
No, it's just expanding.
So according to the Wachowskis, the idea behind Sense8 went back several years back to a quote, late night conversation about the ways technology simultaneously unites and divides us. I'm not going to say that they were high when they were having this conversation, but I'm not going to not say that.
Yeah, I was going to say, but we're not saying that.
But those late night conversations began to form into some real ideas. But Lana and Lilly felt that in order to successfully bring it to the screen, they needed the help of a television veteran because they had no experience there. So they enlisted the help of a guy named J. Michael Straczynski. You guys know that name. If you're listening to the show, you're probably a bit of a nerd and you probably know the name of J. Michael Straczynski, but he had actually worked with the Wachowskis in the past. He wrote James McTeague's Ninja Assassin, which they produced, but he's most well known as the creator of the sci-fi television series Babylon 5. So Lana invites Straczynski to her house in San Francisco to kind of brainstorm ideas for the show. They knew that they wanted this to be something really big. They all agreed that if they were to do a television show together, it would be something that nobody had ever done before, something that would, this is a quote, something that would change the vocabulary for television production, the same way that The Matrix became a major influence on pretty much every action movie that followed it.
And I don't think they were off the mark by too much. They definitely created something unique here.
Incredibly unique. And even the way that they created it is unique, the scope of this. So after several days of discussion, they decided to create a show that would explore the relationship between empathy and evolution in the human race. Fluff.
Oh, that old chestnut.
So here's what Straczynski said about it. This is a quote from Straczynski from an interview that I found. He says, we started out at one point talking about how evolution involves creating ever greater circles of empathy. You belong to your family, then you belong to your tribe, then the two tribes link up, and now you have empathy for your people on this side of the river, and you're against the people on the other side of the river, and on through villages, cities, states, and nations. Nice. So what if, they thought, what if a more literal form of empathy could be triggered in individuals around the planet who suddenly become mentally aware of each other, able to communicate as if they were in the same room? That's where these ideas are kind of flowing. Like, how would they react and to what degree would they accept each other? So with this concept in mind, they knew that they'd be telling a story. It has to be on a global scale. Requiring them to film on location in several countries all over the world, which is not what TV shows normally do. Normally, they go to Vancouver and try to make it look like every other country on Earth. And a lot of times you can tell, a lot of times you can tell that that's what's happening. But they wanted to actually shoot this all over the world in these cities where the story is set. And the title of the show, Sense8, it was actually thought up by Lana on day 2 of their brainstorming sessions. They hadn't actually decided on how many characters they were going to have, but then she just walks over to Straczynski with the word Sense8 written on a notebook, telling him the hard part's over now. Like, we've got it. We know how many characters, we've got a title, we're ready to go. And they became so excited that Lana, Lilly, and Straczynski, they became so excited about this idea. You know how like when you get a really good idea and you get kind of pumped up about it and everybody's like excited to get it going forward. That's kind of what happened with them. So instead of pitching it to someone else, like taking this idea and pitching it to like Netflix before fully developing, they actually went right in and started writing scripts. They wrote 3-hour-long spec scripts, which is very unusual. And then along with Straczynski, started shopping those scripts around. So normally you don't write a spec script like that for a TV show until you've got somebody willing to pay you to do so. But they were so excited about it, they went ahead and wrote essentially the first 3 episodes. So they start shopping them around to studios like Warner Brothers and HBO, and nobody seemed to understand the concept, which is a trend we've seen often with the Wachowskis films. So they decided to shelve the project for a while because nobody was biting. Nobody understood what they were trying to do.
I guess it's a good point to say too that Straczynski is like, he's similarly on the same wavelength like as the Wachowskis a lot of times with like his stories about empathy and I know I've got one of his graphic novels called like Midnight Nation, and it's about the underground people and this sort of thing. But it's almost kind of this underlying story about like the people in society that are forgotten or that sort of thing. And then like he had a series that he got really popular off of, I think, called Rising Stars. I remember reading, and it was about essentially like creating the Marvel universe or the DC universe, but it was like everybody gets a special power, and it's like to see how they learn to work together, who uses these new abilities for good and bad. And it's just like this one event happens on one day at one time, and like all of a sudden these babies are born with powers, basically.
Wow. So is that the TV show Heroes?
Yeah. It sounds like Heroes kind of,
but no, that does sound like, I mean, you can see why they would click, with the Wachowskis and Straczynski. Also, they all have very hard names to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's even some of his Spider-Man stuff has some really heady concepts, and he's we mentioned a couple of things that he's written. Like pull up his Wikipedia sometime and just look at all the stuff he's written.
He's a legend,
very prolific, and not just sci-fi in general, like tons of Star Trek stuff, and he's all over the place. He's written a ton of stuff, so there's something out there for you.
Yeah. So a few years after they've started developing this, once the streaming boom was kind of in full swing and the landscape of television had become friendlier towards more experimental concepts, helped largely, I think, by the success of Lost. Like that show's success really told all the studios that like people are looking for something that's out of the norm, that's not your typical episodic. People are willing to watch a series that is a long form story told over time. So they decided to pitch this idea again. So the first reports on the show, first writing you can find about it, came about in 2012. Variety reported that Wachowskis and Straczynski were shopping it around, writing that if the show were to be picked up, the Wachowskis and Straczynski would share showrunner duties, with the siblings directing a few episodes if their schedules allowed them to do so. And Netflix became the first company that showed any real interest in this. The pitch was, according to Straczynski, quote, the weirdest pitch. Usually you're pitching the action stuff or things that are very commercial. We're talking about gender and identity and secrecy and privacy. And they thought they'd blown the pitch by not emphasizing on the action stuff and by talking about all of their like philosophical stuff. But Netflix was into it. They even responded positively to the idea of shooting all over the world, which is something that every other studio told them back when they were pitching it a few years earlier was clearly impossible. But Netflix has more money than God. So they're willing to throw all this money at it. But they also told Netflix that they would only do it if they had the freedom to do anything like, another quote, crazy psychic orgies with all sorts of different bodies and live births even. Ideas to which Netflix also responded favorably. Those live births did happen, by the way. Those births that you see in this, that's real.
Like fuck out. No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Is it really?
Yeah, they filmed live births for that scene. The scene where you're seeing all of the Sense8s being born, like in the flashbacks. Yeah, those are all real.
I did not know that.
Oh my God.
Interesting. All right.
Wow. Jeez.
So-
Well, I mean, kudos to Netflix, because I mean, even in looking at their stuff, they are definitely, I mean, the trend in Hollywood, of course, is like see that one person is successful and then do 20 knockoffs of it.
Right.
But Netflix has consistently from the beginning, even with stuff like their stand-up comedy, of being able to put the artists in control and let them do what they want to do. Their first stand-up comedy being Zach Galifianakis live at the Purple Onion.
Right.
Watch that if you haven't seen it, because A, it's hilarious, but B, it is structured unlike any other
It is very weird.
stand-up
Yeah.
special. It's very unique.
And sometimes that allowing the artist to have that much freedom works very well for them. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Recent Dave Chappelle stand-up special being a good example of that, but they stood by their guns, even on that, which hasn't worked out terribly well for them, but their stock's fine. They're going to be
doing
okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say actually that the fun part this time around was I was trying to look up reviews for Sense8, like on IMDb and such. And it's so funny to hear like the complaints about Netflix recently compared to like you look at reviews for this show and they're like too woke, what is this? Too much gay. So you're like, this is interesting.
Yeah. So they lead the Netflix offices. They think that they've blown this pitch, but Netflix was into it. And before noon on that day, so they went to Netflix that morning and pitched it. Netflix was into it. They didn't make an offer immediately, but by noon, Netflix called them, offered to buy and produce the entire first season. So they're on. Now, before filming began, Straczynski and the Wachowskis mapped out 5 seasons of stories for the show, including the series' final episode, just similar to what Straczynski had done with Babylon 5. And they pitched it as a 5-year story. And actors, when the actors were signed on, when they made their deals, they made it for 5 seasons. That's what was in their contract.
Nice.
Like if the show lasts 5 seasons, you'll be with us. So the writing for season 1 of the show was split between the Wachowskis and Straczynski. They had a pretty interesting way of writing this. The Wachowskis wrote episodes 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8, while Straczynski wrote episodes 4, 5, 6, 9, and 10. And then the Wachowskis would rewrite Straczynski's scripts and vice versa. So they would each kind of handled the episode on their own, and then they would rewrite each other.
That's pretty cool.
Really interesting collaborative process.
Yeah.
I took a biology class one time, and my buddy in the class there, we would spend the whole class like writing stories together, but I would write like a paragraph and then he would write a paragraph, and they didn't turn out anything like this.
Yeah. So you did that instead of doing your schoolwork?
Yes.
Nice. Sounds like fun though.
So the second season was handled a little bit differently. Writing for season 2 was performed by Lana Wachowski and Straczynski inside of a shared writer's room. So they did it a little bit differently. They actually wrote together. Lilly Wachowski did not write on the second season. After completing her transition, which we talked about a little bit during our Jupiter Ascending episode, she decided to take some time off, and she didn't return as either a writer or director for season 2. I don't think she's listed as a producer on season 2 either. I think she's only listed as a co-creator on the second season of the show, because she was not involved creatively at all.
Thinking about it, I wonder if me doing that instead of taking biology classes, why I didn't know that was a real vagina in the show.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway,
instead, Lana and Straczynski, they brought in some other writers. They brought in David Mitchell, who'd written the novel that Cloud Atlas was based on. Remember, we talked about him. And Alexander Heeman. Heeman had met the Wachowskis in 2009 and then wrote a profile about them and about the making of Cloud Atlas for the New Yorker in 2012. That I mentioned that column during our Cloud Atlas episode, because that actually served as one of my main sources of information for that episode.
Yeah.
And when I was doing it at the time, I had no idea that he was writing with them on Sense8 and later on The Matrix Resurrections.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty interesting.
I guess it's worth mentioning too that the Lilly Wachowski thing, I think we're going to hit pretty heavy on that in the Matrix episode, the Resurrections episode, why she doesn't come back.
Yeah. We'll talk about that when we do that, because she's got her reasons creatively. It wasn't like her and her sister had a falling out or anything like that. It's just it was a fully creative decision.
Lana killed her.
Yeah, she's dead now. So in 2014, Deadline Hollywood announced the series cast of characters. So for the characters that were living outside of America, the filmmakers wanted to assemble a cast of actors that matched the nationality of their characters. So, for example, Duna Bai is from Seoul, just like her character, and Tina Desai is from Mumbai, just like her character, and so on. Duna Bai, of course, returning. She was in Cloud Atlas, as we discussed. She is also my favorite character on this show. Her or Bug. I really like Bug.
Bug's fun.
I'm a big fan of that guy. I love that actor.
He's great.
He's really fun.
Yeah,
Just a great
I was
character.
not familiar with. He seems so like. I don't think I've seen him anywhere, but he seems like he's got a face like I felt like I had seen him before somewhere.
Yeah, he's got that look to him, and that he's really charismatic, and I like that his character like is immediately like very accepting of his friend is last time he saw his friend, she had not transitioned yet, but he immediately like he makes a couple jokes, but he pretty immediately accepts them for who they are. And you don't see that a lot in those type of characters, so I really like the way they handled him. It makes him really lovable, I think.
Oh yeah. I mean, he goes straight from like being confused to like, I'd fuck you.
Yeah. Like, you guys are hot. And of course, Duna Bai is one person in the series that had worked with the Wachowskis before. Cloud Atlas, she was the bounty hunter in Jupiter Ascending. Tuppence Middleton, who plays Riley, the Icelandic DJ, she'd worked with them on Jupiter Ascending as well. She was the one of the heads of the House of Brassix, And then the rest of and then also Max Remelt, who plays Wolfgang, the German guy, he was suggested by Tom Tykwer, the co-director of Cloud Atlas. He'd been wanting to work together with this guy for a long time, so he actually was hired at Tykwer's suggestion. Nice. The rest of the main cluster of 8 included Brian J. Smith as Chicago cop Will Gorski, Emil Amin as the Nairobian Matatu driver Cafius Van Dam, Jamie Clayton, who we mentioned, Jamie Clayton, who herself is a transgender woman. She plays a trans woman hacktivist named Nomi Marks, and Michelle Angel Silvestre as closeted at first actor Lito Rodriguez. And then so that's your main cluster. That's your 8 people. Then you've got other series regulars, includes Freema Agyeman. I've never known if I'm saying her name right, but she plays Neats. She was Martha Washington on Doctor Who.
Of course.
Terrence Mann, who plays Whispers, Naveen Andrews from Lost, who plays Jonas, and Daryl Hannah, who needs no introduction, of course, as Angelica. Daryl Hannah had actually originally been brought in to read for Whispers when they were considering making the character more androgynous, but the filmmakers had her read for Angelica while she was there as well, and she ended up getting that role.
She'd have been pretty cool as Whispers.
She would have been cool, yeah. And you may have noticed, hopefully you noticed, or you really weren't paying attention to the show as you watched it, but the role of Kathy has changed actors in season 2.
Yep.
The new actor is Toby Onwumere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 1 to 10. How did I do?
No, solid. Absolutely.
Toby Onwumere, who I like. I like that they make a little joke about him like going to a barber, and that's why he looks different. Like when his friend
like he shaved his head or something.
Yeah. I like that they address it a little bit and kind of make a joke out of it. But it's unclear why Emil Amin left the show after the first season, but he exited the production abruptly, kind of a couple episodes into the filming of the second season, reportedly over a conflict with Lana Wachowski. According to Deadline, the conflict had begun during a table read for the season, and then their relationship just progressively got worse. According to both that Deadline article and Tuppence Middleton in a later interview, the conflict was over creative differences, So
what?
But I don't know what it could have been. I don't know if he didn't like the direction the story was going in, because his story takes a pretty political bent in season 2. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. He's in more sex scenes in season 2, which could have also been something he didn't want to do.
I feel like I saw a couple of things that talked about there may have been things he didn't want to film.
Yeah, but the thing is, like when they were hiring actors for this, they basically said, like, you have to be willing to do whatever we ask you to do. And this show's going to go to some racy places, and you have to be willing to do that. So if he wasn't willing to do that, even after agreeing to that, that's kind of on him. But I really like Onwumere, or Onwumir. I think he's really good in it. I like him. It took me a couple episodes to warm to him, but overall, I think he plays the part in that second season better than the actor in the first season could have. I buy him more as like this political figure.
Yeah.
Whereas the guy who plays him in the season one, I buy him more as this kind of a little more naive. You know, he's a little
blue collar.
Yeah,
he's the guy that drives the bus.
It works for me.
Yeah.
And Onwumir was cast after like a 7-day auditioning process. They had to get somebody in there pretty quick, and they ended up hiring him pretty quickly. So as we noted before, filming for Sense8 took place almost entirely on location across the whole world. In the first season, filming took place in Berlin, Chicago, London, Mexico City, Mumbai, Nairobi, Reykjavik. It's Iceland.
Yeah.
I read that word a lot, and I've never actually attempted to say it out loud. So Reykjavik, San Francisco, and Seoul. By the end of the first season, the filmmakers had completed 100,000 miles of flight time. That's 4 times around the entire globe. Which is insane. And the writers wanted to feature an event in each city as they were filming. So in the end, they weren't able to get one in every city, but in the end, they were able to schedule the Pride scenes during the Dyke March in San Francisco, which is a thing, the 4th of July fireworks in Chicago, and the Ganesha Kathuri Hindu Festival in Mumbai. So they were actually filming during these events. These were not staged.
As if filming in these locations weren't tricky enough.
Yeah, to try to get it, but it ups the scale of the show because you've got these crowds of thousands, or in the case of in season 2, when they're in where is it that they're in South America, that there are like 2 million people in Sao Paulo when they're there. There's like 2 million people there for that Pride March, and that adds an amazing amount of production value to your show.
It really feels like they were like, oh, Netflix has more money than God, we're going to use it. We're going to see if we can tap that out.
And that second season was even bigger in scope than the first, even though the per episode budget was actually slightly lower. But in season 2, filming took place in all the same cities as season 1, except for Reykjavik. Plus, they filmed in Amsterdam, Argyle, Chippenham, Los Angeles, Malta, Positano, Redwoods, and Sao Paulo. So that's insane to think about. Production for season 2 was expected to begin in March of 2016, but a second unit with the principal actors actually took place. They started shooting in Berlin in December of 2015 so that they could get footage of Berlin during the Christmas holidays for that Christmas special.
It's so wild to think, because you get used to like, okay, first unit, it's your primary actors, your big locations, that's your thing. And as I was watching this, it was like, okay, so this is first unit.
Yeah.
No, okay, this one. No.
Yeah.
It's so tricky to follow everything along of like, okay, now who's in this location and where are they? What's going on?
Because
it's weird to try to keep track of it in your head from a production standpoint.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And because of the scope of it, it was impossible for a single director to handle just one episode.
Right.
Because they'd have to fly over the world. That's logistically impossible.
Yeah.
So instead of assigning one director per episode, each director was actually assigned locations. So even though each episode has a credited director, in reality, none of the episodes has a single director.
Wow.
So in season 1, the Wachowskis directed scenes set in Chicago, San Francisco, London, and Iceland. Then their longtime collaborator, James McTeague, who directed V for Vendetta, he directed scenes set in Mexico City and Mumbai, along with a few scenes there in Iceland. And then Tom Tykwer, their co-director on Cloud Atlas, was responsible for scenes shot in Berlin and Nairobi. Dan Glass, we've mentioned him on the show before. He'd been working with the Wachowskis as a special effects supervisor for several years. He actually made his directorial debut on the show, filming the soul section of the story. So in the end, though, the Wachowskis are given directing credits on 7 episodes of the first season. McTeague and Tykwer each get 2, and Glass gets 1. I'm not sure how they decided who gets what episode. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, did this, because it makes me think of Robert Rodriguez and Frank Miller doing Sin City, and how that caused like such a big, brouhaha with the DGA. Like, did that cause any issues with, any of the
I didn't come across anything
unions or anything like that. No, okay.
Nothing that I came across. I mean, they're all directing, they're all getting credit, but I don't know if it's based on like a percentage of the production or what. I'm not sure.
Yeah, wasn't most of the thing with Frank Miller to do with the fact that he wasn't in the DGA?
He wasn't in the guild. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. No, that makes sense. But yeah, I wonder if it's. I wonder if it's like based on a percentage.
It may be. I'm really not sure. I couldn't find anything that said like why they were assigned an episode, essentially, you know.
Yeah.
So in season 2, as we mentioned, Lilly Wachowski took a break from the show. So the episodes were written solely by Lana and Straczynski, and Lana took over many of the filmmaking duties in the second season. McTeague did return to direct Mexico City. Tickver returned to direct in Nairobi, and Dan Glass, I think, directed a couple of episodes and did some second unit stuff. But the second season is almost entirely done by Lana solo.
Wow.
God. Yeah. Which is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And Sense8, of course, as we've kind of already touched on this, but it does continue the Wachowskis' trend of working with a familiar family of workers around them. This family has changed over the years. You know, you saw a lot of overlap between maybe The Matrix and V for Vendetta and even a little bit of Speed Racer. But then with Cloud Atlas, I feel like their work family, their filmmaking family grew a lot, and they continue to work with a lot of the people that they worked with starting with Cloud Atlas. So they worked with John Toll on Cloud Atlas and on Jupiter Ascending. He's the cinematographer for them, and he's credited as Sense8 cinematographer, and he personally handled the cinematography in San Francisco, Chicago, London, Iceland, and Seoul. And in season 2, he handled almost every location. Other cinematographers were brought in to work with the other directors on the series as needed. Like Jim McTeague worked with a guy named Danny Ruman, and Tickver worked with Frank Grebe, who he had worked with on Cloud Atlas, I think, on his sections, and Christian Almsberger. So they all had kind of their guys they were working with, but John Toll, as the overall cinematographer, was kind of the be all end all, like, decision maker on that.
Yeah.
Part, you know,
it seems like you kind of have to.
Well, if you want,
like, your normal department heads become head of like multiple departments.
Yeah, I mean, production on a TV series is very different than a film, and this one, the way they're doing it is almost a blend of traditional TV production and film, because normally you don't have like one director doing a whole series. I mean, in recent years, you've seen more of that with, what's his name from that did The Haunting of Hill House, Mike Flanagan. But you don't see that a lot. In TV up until recent years. It's usually just journeymen, and the producers kind of creatively, or the showrunner creatively, oversees everything. And you'll have a cinematographer for the show, but that person's not necessarily shooting everything. That's impossible. It's not unlike having, a cinematographer on a film and then having a second unit cinematographer. Well, they have to make it look like everything else, because it has to be a consistent look.
Exactly.
So it's a really interesting process.
Mm-hmm.
And then the show's score, just like Cloud Atlas, was composed by Tickver and Johnny Klimek. Remember, they'd been working together since like Run Lola Run, and will continue to work with the Wachowskis after this.
I imagine like cinematography being more scientific in nature, just kind of like, okay, here, we used this lens, we shot at this speed, and this, with this lighting setup for this particular location, and then you kind of disseminate it out to people it's the recipe, and I figure you gotta like send it out. But I wonder what was part of the recipe, and then where did everybody put their own little signature? It's like, this is my little thing here. That's I think that might be the fun stuff to try to
you'd have to talk, you'd have to interview a TV cinematographer probably to find that information. So season 1 of this came out in 2015, debuted on June 5th, as it is, Netflix always does. The whole season came out at once. And then season 2, they actually did like a Christmas special in December of 2016. So if you're watching Netflix, it's listed, I think, as the first episode of season 2, but it's a 2-hour long, basically a movie, 2 hour long. It's called Happy Fucking New Year, I think is the name of the episode. But it's their Christmas special, and that was sort of inspired by, Lana Wachowski grew up watching Christmas specials on like Mork and Mindy and stuff, and always thought it was cool to have like this, a Christmas setting for this kind of stuff, which is it is pretty fun. I mean, Doctor Who's been doing it for years as well.
Oh yeah.
And then the rest of the season debuted on May 5th, 2017. In June of 2017, a month after season 2 debuted, Netflix announced that they'd canceled the series after 2 seasons. And according to Netflix, it was because the film's or the show's audience, while very passionate, just wasn't big enough to warrant the show's high production costs. However, fans began creating online petitions, as they are wont to do, and they would call Netflix. They were tweeting out hashtags like Save Sense8 or whatever it was, just trying to bring the show back, at least to get some kind of conclusion. And then on June 29th, the show's official social media accounts posted a letter written by Lana Wachowski that announced an upcoming 2-hour special that would serve as the series finale. I couldn't find any information on how that came about from Netflix, like if Lana met with them and kind of convinced them, let us at least wrap this up, because otherwise, before that finale, it ends on a cliffhanger, like very a big cliffhanger.
Oh yeah.
So that what should have been the end of season 2 is a major cliffhanger, and it would have been very disappointing if they hadn't been able to have some sort of finale, but they did. And Lana returned to direct the finale. She actually co-wrote that episode with David Mitchell and Alexander Heeman. And the final episode was released on June 8th, 2018. It's like 2.5 hours long. It's a feature length, but it works as kind of the wrap up to the entire story. And I'm glad that it did get a chance to have an ending. Like, that's not something that a lot of shows that are prematurely canceled get. They don't get that opportunity. I know there have been shows that I've loved in the past that'll get canceled, and then you're just left hanging. Like the biggest one for me has always been Carnival on HBO, which is a show that I think was very ahead of its time. I think it would do really well now. But it ends in a major cliffhanger in season 2, and then we never got anything else from it. It's very frustrating.
More recently, I mean, for different reasons, but like Glow, I was absolutely heartbroken.
Oh yes. And that one, I understand why it got canceled. It wasn't because it wasn't doing well. It was a matter of logistically filming during a pandemic. But that one is very disappointing to me, because I wanted to see a wrap up to that story.
Yeah.
And I do think the ending of this is a little bit rushed, especially in how Whispers gets taken out at the end. It's a little anticlimactic. And there are clearly some plot threads that were abandoned in order to get everyone back together for the ending. They were kind of just waved away. But overall, I think it's a mostly satisfying conclusion to the story. This is the first time either of you watched it, right? You did not watch it in the past.
Correct? This was a first viewing for me. For sure. Yeah.
I had watched it originally when it came out, but I never saw the finale. So this is my first watch of the end of it.
Nice.
First time for you as well, right, Gary?
Yeah. This is the first time I'd ever seen it.
Well, the reason I wanted to make sure that we all watched this during this series on the Wachowskis is because I think it is an integral part of their filmography. It's a show that brings together themes that have permeated their work for decades, like literally since the beginning, or at least since The Matrix. This is like almost a culmination of all of the stuff that they've been trying to say in their movies before this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the heady concepts are not unfamiliar to the Wachowski filmography. Fantastic performances, stunning cinematography. It's all par for the course for them, and and cranked to 11 as much as you can crank something to 11 in a Netflix series. They hit
the production value on this. It's like watching a 25-hour movie. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, there are episodes that are a little more dialogue driven and plot driven, and then there are episodes that they'll have big action set pieces. There are car chases that rival things that you'll see in movies. There are, especially with Duna Bai's character, you get some incredible martial arts stuff.
Really great.
And honestly, the fight scenes in general, like the way that they edit them, especially when they cut from one character to another because one's embodying another character.
Right.
The way that they edit those scenes together, whether it's a car chase or a hand-to-hand fight or guns, depending on the character, is really like the editing more than anything on this show really kind of blew my mind. Like how well they integrate that all.
It really from a technical standpoint, and I'm not usually the person to comment on the technical aspects of anything, but it is very clear that this is a testament to editing. Like this is a love letter to editors. Like this is this is how this is how it's done. This is the big thing on the technical side is the editing here.
Well, so when we were discussing this, over the last few weeks, I know Gary kind of binged this like towards the in December, kind of watched the whole thing really in close, he watched it all very quickly. And I know when you were nearing the end of this, Gary, this is before we had decided to do a full episode or a full bonus episode on this. You said something along the lines of, we need to do a bonus episode on Sense8 because I've got some thoughts.
Yeah. I was trying to it captured me that it was a frustrating show for me.
Okay.
Like it was
how so though?
But because there are moments of it that are just brilliant, I think. And like just flashes of like just some of the story I just thought was fantastic, and just they'd have these awesome lines that like stuff I wanted to write down and just like remember for later. And then
I watched a lot of it with subtitles on, which is something I've been doing lately, because it really allows some of the dialogue to pop, that like things that you might have glanced over initially, and it really like highlights just how good some of the dialogue is. Not just in this movie, but movies in general. I think that's something I've been enjoying doing lately. If it's a movie I've seen before, I've gone back and rewatched it again with subtitles on, just to like find things I hadn't found before.
Oh yeah.
Right. And then sometimes I'd watch it and be like, Jesus, this fucking blows. Like,
like what?
like I'm like, this is the worst acting I've ever seen. Like, why is this happening?
Who do you think? Like, give me an example.
There's a scene that especially like I think, because I one that stands out in my brain right now was it happened really close together. I think it was in the same episode, and I wish I'd have written down what episode it was, but it was where Numi and I just forgot her chick's name. Neats and Neats' mom, and they're meeting with a scientist, and they're walking through like a museum or something, and they're walking like in a straight line together, like very awkwardly, like just all
like side by
side, like walking, and they're like, it's kind of funny that this would happen. Well, as you know already, in 1872, this was discovered, and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, what the fuck is this?
Like, who talks that way?
Yeah, like who talks this way? Who walks
and
this
now
way?
for the scene of exposition.
Yeah, it was like, this is the most awkward shit I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Like, why is this happening? And
then, but sometimes you got to do that stuff to just get the story, going.
Yeah, it just, and then like right after that, though, they had like, I think in that same episode is the one where they have the reporter comes to what's his face and is Jella, and is like talking to him about isn't it Jella? Yeah. Like, who are you, or like what are you really about? And then they have that where it switches in between people as they're talking about who they are. Like it's I think the one reporter's talking to her, and then or him, and then at the same time, you had like, what's his face? I forget. Leto. We had Leto getting interviewed on the red carpet or something. And then it's like, they're all just switching back and forth doing the things. And it was like one of the coolest things I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, this is really great. And this is a great speech. And like, the
Wachowskis have never been great at presenting exposition in a way that, I mean, the best, I think, example of them presenting exposition is Morpheus explaining the Matrix. So when he's in that room, but that's literally just a dude sitting explaining. The only reason that scene works is because Lawrence Fishburne is fucking great in it. Because otherwise, it's just a guy explaining stuff, and they do that a lot. And sometimes it slows things down, like the Mervengian in Matrix Reloaded, where he just stops to talk about philosophy for 5 minutes. It would they're at this restaurant. They do that, and it's just something that I've come to accept from them. And sometimes they're going to give us some exposition. A lot of times it's about a very heady subject, and it's going to be a little bit the way that it's inserted into the story is a little bit jarring.
There's a book
You know.
I read like way back when I took a class on philosophy, back when I was more educated or trying to be. It's called Sophie's World, and I still have it. And it made me want to go back and read it because I remember one of the first things I thought about that book was it's about this girl who like somehow falls into this portal and is getting transported back into these different philosophers' lives. So it's like supposed to be like a creative way for you to understand like what this person's deal was, what their major thoughts were, and that sort of thing. But it's like trying to have this overarching narrative, and then all of a sudden she's like with I'm trying to think of a philosopher, but
Plato.
Yeah, I was gonna say Plato,
Socrates.
or I couldn't even think of the guy from Bill and Ted. I don't know, Socrates. Socrates.
Yeah, Socrates.
But she's like in there with them, and then they're just like explaining their thoughts, and it's like, oh, this person's giving like a summary of their whole life to this little girl right now, and it's like it's kind of weird. And Sense8 does that every once in a while. Like it's like sometimes I'm like really into it, and then all of a sudden it comes to a screeching halt, and it is like a high school PSA like video where they're like, well, as you know,
Yeah.
like it just feels like that. Like it's like
You expect Captain America to bring the chair over and sit on the chair.
So you found yourself in a trans relationship. It's like, it's like, oh, here we go.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I don't think that it really hurts the series overall for me, because I think that in general it works really well. I think the action set pieces are great, but I think, we wanted to discuss this series because we did think that it really fit within, we've been talking a lot about the thematic through line of the Wachowskis' work, and I think this really, like, you can't talk about their work without talking about this,
Yeah.
and we've discussed this since the beginning of the series, especially how the Wachowskis coming out as trans women have put all of their work in kind of a new context, including, early stuff like The Matrix. And I think that we've, one thing that we've kind of concluded as we've talked about this series is that their work overall is about love. It's about the relationship between the body and the mind. It's about the self that the world sees versus the self inside. That's what all of these films have been about, with maybe the exception of Speed Racer. And these are all themes that are at the heart of Sense8. They're all here, everything they've talked about. And these, like I said, these started back in really The Matrix, and somewhat in Bound, but especially in The Matrix. And it really all came to a head in Cloud Atlas, which is a film that I think feels almost like a practice run for Sense8 in a way. Cloud Atlas kind of had the idea. It said that we're all connected in ways that we may not understand. Sense8 literalizes that idea, by literally having people connected.
And I love that thought. I think that's beautiful. And don't get me wrong, I walked away from this show thinking like I'd love to see this again. Like I really started to care by the end of it. Like for every one of the characters, I was kind of bummed it was over. Like I wanted to see more. And
even characters you don't really care about early on. Like I had a hard time in the first season caring about Will Gorski, the Chicago cop. I had a hard time caring about him. He just seemed kind of bland, but over in season 2, especially, he gets a lot more interesting when he starts doing heroin, I guess.
That's most people.
Yeah, but I started to really care about him more. And same with Wolfgang. Wolfgang seemed a little cookie cutter in the season 1, but then you start getting into his backstory and stuff. I still think his friend is fucking annoying. But his buddy, his partner, gets on my nerves. But Felix. He becomes one of the coolest characters on the show.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. It's interesting, and just to see these different plays. Although I gotta say, Mexico cannot be that anti-gay, can they? Really?
I don't know.
Like they're just like immediately, like the whole class just like rails on him.
It's a very Catholic country.
Yeah.
It's a very Catholic country. So this show, I mean, it is, from a filmmaking standpoint, it is pretty remarkable. It juggles multiple storylines set in locations all around the globe. It has the occasional action set piece that, like I said before, I think some of these set pieces rival some of the best work being done in traditional feature-length films. There's some really stunning work being done.
Yeah.
But I think the real draw of the show is the relationship between the Sense8s. I mean, that's the heart of the show. The idea that these 8 people, all with vastly different backgrounds from different countries, speaking different languages, they all learn to understand each other and to support each other despite their differences, you know?
Yeah,
they have a lot of orgies together.
Yeah. Which
They
that
fuck a lot.
really draws people together. I mean, look at the 3 of us. And
that was another thing though. I mean, if I'm just being honest, like sometimes I'm watching this and I'm like, you know, and I mean this with all respect to the Wachowskis because I think they're brilliant, but like sometimes I watch it and I was like, did you guys finally feel freed up to like, now you're just like, I don't know how transition works. I don't know enough about this, but I was like, did you guys get like a horny teenager phase? Like, did you know what I mean? Like, it's just because it's just like there's a lot of fucking in this show.
Yeah.
And I was at the end of it. I was like, man, who do you recommend this show to? I was like, you got to kind of be careful sometimes.
Yeah. I'm not going to tell my mom to watch this show.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, 'cause there's a whole lot of fucking. That's one thing. You gotta be pretty open to a lot of ideas, and a lot of that is orgies.
There's also a lot of these scenes where I think they overdo it. I think the scenes as standalone scenes are all very well done, what I'm about to talk about, but I think they overdo it by doing too many of them. And that's the scenes where there's like a song playing and then it's showing what everyone's doing and how they're connected. Now, when the first time they do it, they do Four Non Blondes, What's Up, great song. And they're all singing it and it's really cool. And you're seeing how they're singing it all over the world. But then they just keep doing this throughout the series where they just we're going to have a 7-minute montage of us singing a song. And sometimes they're not as good as Four Non Blondes. Sometimes they're less interesting songs, but it feels like this kind of ties into how they keep showing orgies. It's like, yeah, we get it. They're connected. Like
I was
we
definitely
understand.
gonna get into the dancing too, like all the dance parties they have together, and it's just
they're just having a good time.
Will Gorski don't have dance parties.
No, but the thing is, Will Gorski, when you watch him in the scenes where they're dancing, he is a terrible dancer, and I don't know if that's because the actor is a terrible dancer, or if that was a choice where he was like, this Chicago police officer, this Polish Chicago police officer is not going to be good at dancing. So I'm going to do a bad job at it on purpose. And if that's the case, then well done.
The same rules apply for white people dancing in real life, film, television. You either have to shoot it in extreme slow motion. So they're doing kind of the real slower movements or strobe light. Everybody looks good dancing in a strobe light. You're only seeing a little.
If the scenes in Berlin are any indication, then when Wolfgang's dancing, it's just a lot of jumping up and down, and getting really sweaty in the meantime.
Yeah, he's a raver, so that's what he does. He likes glow sticks and LSD. And that's
well, if we can, I hadn't really. I mean, I've praised this show so far for technical things, and we've talked about these great character moments, but I feel like, and maybe this is a hot take, maybe it isn't, but I feel like the actual plot, especially involving Whispers and like this secret scientific government conspiracy organization thing, I felt like that actually took away from it. I felt like I would rather watch the character moments of these people develop.
I think that in
than the overall plot.
I think that they really do focus on that a lot more in season 2. One of the complaints that people had in season 1 was that the show was slow because it does take a while to get into that stuff. And it takes several episodes for them to even realize that they're all 8 connected,
Right.
You're halfway through the first season before that even happens. But I do think you need some sort of driving conflict, a story, and I do think that I can see where you're coming from. I don't really think it takes away from it. I do think it's obvious that there was more to it that we didn't get.
Right. And here's
because once you start getting the backstory from Angelica and all that, like, I think it's fascinating. It's really good.
as an
It's a
example,
real missed
like
opportunity,
watching.
by the way, that they didn't do any of the dancing to Van Damme dancing and Kickboxer. That's also a thing I noticed. I don't know how that never came up.
But as an example, like when Leto and his guy and the other chick finally get to Hollywood and stuff starts happening with his career, like I was kind of invested in that, and you never hear anything else about it.
Well, you don't
again.
really get to, because the show got canceled.
Well, yeah. I was like, well, you spent all this time and all of the show's strengths actually end up also being their weaknesses as well. It's like, it's incredibly shot and they shot on location. And then you see some accountant falling over at Netflix going, we're shooting in all of these locations. Oh my God.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like, well, there's all this like really rich character stuff. And I was like, yeah, but Netflix, it's not like the Nielsen ratings. Netflix knows exactly how many people are watching the show.
Yeah.
And if the numbers aren't there, the numbers aren't there. So
and I think that some of those complaints, though, like I think would have been addressed had there been a third, fourth, and fifth season. You would have gotten to explore each of their stories more, because you do really get invested in. There's this overall thing that they're all fighting for, trying to figure out who Whispers is, and the BPO, I think is what it is, the BPO, and the background of all this, and you start finding out more about Jonas and because he's a very interesting character who you never know where he stands, and you find out Angelica's backstory, and what was the guy's name, Raul or something like that that she kind of had to save. But, you also get very invested. They also all have their own stories going on separately, because you've got like Leto's is one of the more interesting ones. I think his story is really good. But you've got even the little side story with, I can't remember her name, but Leto's girlfriend. I'm not really sure what their relationship is, but like her thing with her ex and all that. And then you've got the thing
third
with
wheel,
Wolfgang, his conflict with, after he steals the diamonds, and they've all got their own like cool little stories on the side, which is kind of what endears you to them. Nomi is her story. I just love her and Nietzsche's relationship. I think they're awesome. They're that's one of my favorite parts. And Sun, her story is, I think, the most compelling. And maybe it's just because I have, over the course of this series, learned to really love Duna Bai as an actress. And because I think she's just got a great screen presence, and she's a badass. And her story is really good. Like it's like the thing with her brother and her going to prison. Like I could watch a show about that.
Yeah.
What's funny is I saw like a lot of articles about racism from the Wachowskis while I was just like looking around, and like this is an example they use a lot, that like people were complaining that like the Korean girl gets the martial arts thing, and Jella, like he just deals with AIDS and poverty and stuff like that, and like it just, I don't know, to me it was just like, well, this is the culture they're in, so I don't know.
I mean, they're not making, I mean, there are Koreans who know kung fu, and guess what, Duna Bai is one of them. She is a martial artist.
I found that quite fun that she got to do kung fu. And one of my favorite scenes of the whole show is the Van Damme bus literally like kicking that dude off the motorcycle.
Yes. Oh, it's great. It's great. She's I like her. Have you watched any of her other stuff? Well, you've seen Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, I think, right, Gary?
Yeah, I've seen that.
She's in that show Kingdom that's on Netflix, that like Korean zombie show that I have not seen, but I've heard very good things about. So
nice.
Yeah. So anyway, back to, we're talking about this series as part of the Wachowskis' kind of overall filmography. And I think that, one of the things that we've talked about with this series is like the queer themes of their filmography, which, again, looking back at The Matrix in context, in a new context, you get some of that stuff. It's very clear in something like Cloud Atlas. But here, I mean, it's right. It's not even like subtext. It's right there on the table. Like that's part of what the show is about. All of their work to this point has had this consistent thread of the separation of identity from physicality. That goes all the way back to the Matrix, and that's the case with Sense8, especially with Naomi Marks, of course, the trans woman who, by the way, is going to be playing Pinhead in the new Hellraiser reboot, which I'm really stoked about.
That's going to be cool
because I think she's great. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited for that. But you've got to, and you've got to, of course, in the way that Cloud Atlas gender bends its casting, they're basically saying that the person inside is more real than the one on the outside. And that's something that you're going to continue to see in their work. I also think, though, that this is the most emotional of the Wachowskis' works. Like, one thing that we've
for sure
that we've talked about, especially the further back in their filmography you go, going back to Bound and the Matrix, Gary even noted early on that a lot of their characters felt robotic almost, like very, but that's not the case anymore. I don't think. I think that stopped happening, especially with starting with Cloud Atlas. This feels like it's almost hard to believe that it's the same directors directing the actors in this, that they were directing the actors in the Matrix to do what they were doing there,
except for the scenes like where they're walking side by side and
right. But
and
this,
then you're like, oh, they've still got some of those those qualities still built in.
But I do think this is the most emotional and the most heartfelt of their work. I think this is like a work of fiction that really feels like Lana and Lilly Wachowski are bearing their souls in a way that they have not before. This is everything, all of their emotions, all of their sincerity, all of their kind of their feeling that love conquers all. That's kind of like an overarching theme in the Wachowskis' work. That's sort of all of that is sort of right here. This is essentially, it's a show about empathy, and the idea of like how in tune we could be with each other, if given the chance. And I think that's, for its flaws and for its clunkiness sometimes, and I think all of their movies are have some clunkiness here and there, but I think that emotional like through line just it makes it kind of puts it on another level for me.
I think the Matrix fucked the Wachowskis. Like they get like that movie. Everybody thinks of that movie as like one of the great action movies of all time. I feel like that's the first thought you that comes to mind when you think of the Matrix. Is
understandable.
The new movie even kind of hits on this, but like bullet time. That's the immediate
instead
thought.
of focusing on the philosophy and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I'm like watching through this, like I heard before going into the Matrix, like one of my mother-in-laws, like therapist, like had talked about, oh, don't expect much. It's kind of, whatever with the new Matrix. And I was like, nah, but Jennifer's like, what are you expecting? And I'm like, I feel like I've got a kind of a good idea. I've watched a whole series of Wachowski stuff.
We've watched them all.
Like, yeah. I was like, I kind of think that my expectations are properly set for what the new Matrix is going to be. And then, it's they're just, I guess where I'm trying to go with this is they're just different. They're not what people think. So like, even when they think Sense8, a lot of complaints you'll see is like slow and that sort of thing, which it is, but that's also kind of how they are. And like there's just parts where it's slow, and there's parts that are clunky because they do have parts that are clunky in a lot of their stuff. But then they have like these moments of great brilliance that like you're just like, oh, this is one of the best things I've ever seen. Yeah. And so it's tough with the Wachowskis.
But for me, I think the good stuff, that brilliance overshadows some of the flaws.
Well, it does for me now too. That's why I sat through Sense8. And I'm like still at the end of it. Like I love all of this, but then it goes back to what I was saying. Like, who would you recommend Sense8 to? Like, it's tough sometimes because you're like, some people are going to see some of the acting, I feel like, and if I'm even thinking that, then I'm like, some people are going to see it and be like, what the hell? Or some people are going to see all of the sex and be like, what the hell? It's, it's just, I think it's weird. They're a weird thing, the Wachowskis, in how they direct and write. And
it's very unique. It's a very unique relationship for two filmmakers, the way that they've worked up until now. And Sense8 is also sort of like almost like a turning point for them, because this is when Lana goes off on her own in season 2 of this, and she's going to continue to do that. Will they ever make a movie together again? I don't know. I mean, I hope so one day, but whatever creatively fulfills them is really what kind of matters. But this is a big part of their filmography. So I'm glad we talked about it, because one, like I said, thematically, it is everything we've talked about with them so far is all right here.
For sure.
From filmmaking standpoints, everything we've talked about, the good and the bad, is all right here. But I feel like at this point, even though it's the blending of TV shows and movies, that line between the two is getting ever blurrier, with stuff like Sense8 or a lot of the stuff that Netflix and HBO are doing. What makes it a movie because it's 2 hours long, or like is the Haunting of Hill House a 10-hour movie? What if one director's doing the whole thing? What's the difference? Well, I think that at a certain, as you go forward in the future, you're going to have to start looking at stuff like Sense8 as part of the overall filmography of a director.
I agree.
Well, Steven Soderbergh's done a couple of TV shows now, and like, you're going to talk about Soderbergh and just ignore something that he not only made himself but made 10 hours of, right? How can you ignore that?
Yeah, this wasn't, and this wasn't just like I directed an episode of Sense8. This was like this was very clearly
years of their lives.
Yeah, one of the huge projects.
Yeah.
The bummer for me watching it this time is by the end of it, like I was loving the characters. So it's kind of a bummer because they don't get 5 seasons of this show. And also it really does feel like they were pacing it for 5 seasons from the start. And so that last episode, I'd 100% take it over not having anything at all. And I'm glad they got to wrap it up.
You get some stuff wrapped up. You get a little bit of closure, and the ending in the Eiffel Tower is wonderful. I mean, they actually did that. They actually shot at the Eiffel Tower, which is crazy awesome that they were allowed to do that. It is great. I mean, because you've learned to love all of these characters, and it's great to see them celebrating. And you get one last great orgy at the end of it.
I was about to say, the only thing is, like, I really don't feel like Rajan was gonna immediately be like, all right, fuck it, I'll do Wolfgang too.
Yeah, Rajan, as soon as they tell him, like as soon as she explains it to him in that episode, he's like pretty accepting pretty quickly. That, yes, you're telepathically
that
linked
felt like
to 7 other people.
Yeah, that felt like it was going to be at least a season's worth,
right?
Like, coming to terms with this relationship.
They did what they had to do, to be able to tell the story and give it a somewhat satisfying conclusion.
I don't know everything about Indian culture, obviously, but I'm watching that like he's Pakistani, isn't he? I don't know that Rajan and his background are just gonna immediately, like, he didn't come across to me as the type of guy that's like, you know what, fuck my wife. Actually, I'll fuck you too. Fuck me and her.
Yeah.
this is fine.
All right. Well, I guess that's it. That's all I've got for this. And we'll unless you guys have anything else to add.
I would definitely revisit. I know Gary said he would watch it again. I would definitely incorporate the Christmas special into my yearly watching.
Yeah,
it's fun.
It's good. It's really good.
I legitimately, man. I'm not kidding. I would watch it again. Like, I kind of want to. Like, I miss the characters. Like, I miss, and I think the ones I miss the most, right off the top of my head right now. Like, I think about Leto a lot. I don't know why. Great. But I really,
the actor, he's
great
very
performances.
Great. And his what's his partner's name? I can't remember his name, but he's a great actor. I love that guy.
Yeah.
He's just very likable, like right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're both. Yeah,
I love Jamie Clayton. I can't wait to see her do more stuff.
Yeah. Fernando. God, I couldn't think of it till right now. Fernando. Yeah. And that whole story to me was just kind of fascinating and just. I don't know. I don't think that Miguel what's his name, Silvestri.
Yeah,
I don't even think he's gay in reels. I mean, but he does so well in that role. Like I think he kills it.
Yeah, he's really great. I'd like to see him do more stuff. I think he's Spanish, which he plays a Spanish character in the show that's living in Mexico and making movies in Mexico. But I think he mostly does Spanish language stuff. I don't think he's done a lot of English language stuff.
And I know you said Wolfgang was kind of cookie cutter, but the actor Max Reinfeldt or whatever, he's well,
I think he starts off cookie cutter. I think he gets really good. I really like him.
There's something about his facials, like he's just got like a vulnerability to him too that I really like. Like I feel like he seems like I don't know a better way to put it, like a beaten dog or something. Like he seems like he's been abused, and like he's just a good actor. Like he's
a very good actor. Yeah, he absolutely is. I mean, I think this show. I don't think there's a bad actor in the bunch. I mean, I know you mentioned some of the performances. I do think that there are a couple here and there who I don't think some side characters, who aren't like part of the main 8 who do some less than great performances. But I think overall, I think the cast of this is really solid. I think they're really good. Tina Desai, who plays Kala, I think she's incredible. She's a big star in Bollywood. She's an actress and model, and she's very popular. But Tuppence Middleton, I would love to see more work from her because I loved her in Jupiter Ascending as well. She's just got a great screen presence. Yeah, it's just filled with great actors, I think.
But not Max, huh?
But not Max, no.
Or Felix,
I love
Felix, yeah.
Right.
No, I don't think it's even the actor there. I think the character is just annoying.
Yeah. But I wonder if this would have been. I wonder if this narrative would have been better served in a different structure. Maybe each character getting their own feature, which might have been cheaper, and then having, I guess, kind of like the Avengers, where it's like, okay, every character gets their own movie and then we bring them all together for this.
Except I think part of the thing with this that works really well is that their stories parallel sometimes, like different scenarios, but a similar,
like you were talking about earlier with Leto and Cafias, where they're both being interviewed at the same time.
Right. Well, then that would have been fun to have like a super cut where it's kind of like chopped up. And then, again, we talked about the editing here. It might have been fun to see a super cut or whatever, where it's like, hey, we know you've watched all these films. Well, now we've cut them all together.
Yeah, but then you're asking people to watch something that they've already watched. And this is a TV show, not a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I think they had the right idea here. I just, I think it's another. I mean, I just say the Wachowskis are just steadily ahead of the curve on what the world's ready for. Yet, I think is probably what happened.
Always. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you all for joining us for this kind of extra long bonus episode. But again, we felt like this was really necessary to talk about as a part of the Wachowskis. So we'll be releasing this. If you're subscribed to us, and this came out on what would normally be a release day for a full episode, we're switching up our release schedule a little bit. So in just a few more days, you'll have our next episode, our next full episode. Not that this isn't a full episode, but we're considering it a bonus. But our next episode, of course, is going to wrap up our series on the Wachowskis. We're going to be talking about The Matrix Resurrections. So if you haven't watched it, watch it before that new episode drops, because we are going to be spoiling the shit out of it. Yeah. So, anyway, where can you guys be found on the internet for our listeners?
This is Gary Horne on all the social medias.
And if you like Star Trek, and if you want to follow along with me and my rotating panel of family, friends, and occasional Star Trek cast members through the entire franchise in chronological order, please look for my podcast, the Computer Resume Podcast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And you can reach out to the show at Computer Resume on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and Patreon.
You're on Patreon?
Yeah, I'm getting that. Yeah, getting that set up and finalizing that this weekend.
Nice.
And I am at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials. Yeah, I'm done. I'm done begging for listeners. Now I'm just begging for money.
You got to have the listeners that are willing to give you the money, though.
Exactly. So we'll do a little bit of
tricky
both.
part.
Yeah. Well, I'm at Justin_Bishop. That is on Twitter and Instagram and Letterboxd. You can find the show at cinema_shock. Find us on Facebook, find us on Discord, find us at cinemashock.net, buy our merch, all that stuff, rate and review. I got nothing else. Until next week.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys.
Really, that's all you got? Can't even pretend like somebody else took over your body. Or...
Well, he is having a giant orgy, and our listeners can't see this. He is surrounded by naked bodies right now. So.
I'm actually getting blown right now by a Chicago police officer. So
he's having sex with every Johnny
right now.